So we are here with Doug Kirkpatrick, really a star, a very well-known author and pioneer and thought leader into the space of self-management. Today we'll have the chance to talk a bit about his experience at Morningstar, one of the best and more inspiring stories in this area. But probably we'll go a bit deeper on some aspects connected to that experience and other experiences that Doug may have put together during the years. So, welcome, Doug. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Emanuele. Great pleasure to be with you. Good to see you again.
My pleasure. In these conversations that we call conversations about organizing at the edge, we try to explore the nuances of experiences that may not be so new, but they're still in stark contrast with quite everything we still see in the market. So maybe let's start with a brief overview about your role today, your role back then in Morningstar, and what Morningstar is for those 3-4 people in the world that may have never heard about it.
Okay, that's a great question. Thank you. I might start with my Morningstar experience because that essentially led me to what I am doing today. So, I actually started working with the founder of Morningstar before Morningstar. And in the 1980s, our founder had an idea for a high-tech, high-volume, um, highly efficient food processing company, and I joined him basically right out of college as a financial controller of that enterprise. And so we built this little company, and the company was very successful. It eventually grew to about $100 million US in sales, and it was great from a purely financial performance point of view. But our founder, Chris Rufer, noticed some things about the organization that were a little bit frustrating, and so he realized that watching people come to work, they'd park their cars in the parking lot and enter the workplace and punch a time clock. And he realized that every one of those individuals is already a manager in their own personal lives. So all those people are making gigantic life-altering decisions on their own, somehow without a boss. They're deciding who to date, who to marry, what to do for a living, whether to buy a house or a car, have children, whatever it is. And no boss is telling them what to do. So if they know what to do at work and how to do it, why do they need a boss at all? So that was one of his more profound insights. And so in 1990, well, actually, he left that company in 1988 and then started working on a project called Morningstar. And then in 1990, he was ready to break ground on that project. And so I joined him at Morningstar and fulfilled the role of financial controller. So it was finance and accounting, but everyone wore a lot of hats in a startup, as you can well imagine. And so I handled IT and HR and risk management and legal affairs and some marketing and some production and some other things. So it was quite a robust experience. And so at that time, we had a factory to build. And this was, I would say, February, March timeframe of 1990. And so we were working out of a tiny little farmhouse on a dusty canal bank here in Northern California. And there was a core team of about 24 people. Most of the core team were technicians, electricians, mechanics, etc. And I was the finance and admin person. And one day, Chris came into the farmhouse and said, let's have a meeting, talk about how to organize. I got some ideas. And so we said, sure, of course. And so we met at night in a double-wide construction trailer on the job site. We sat around on folding chairs in a circle, and Chris handed out a document called the Morningstar Team Principles. And the principles basically boiled down to two things. The first was human beings should not use force or coercion against other human beings, which is the foundation of all law against assault and battery and murder and all the rest. The other principle was people should keep the commitments they make to each other, which of course is the foundation of civil law, especially contract law, which would mean nothing if parties didn't keep their promises. And so we discussed and debated these core principles for a couple of hours. At the end of the evening, we just looked around the circle at each other and said, we don't have any arguments against these principles. They are self-evident principles. They're crystal clear. And so we adopted those principles as pretty much the entire governance of the enterprise. And so when the 24 of us filed out of that construction trailer, at that moment, in that instant, we became a self-managed enterprise. So this was March of 1990. We still had a factory to build. So we had hundreds of contractors on the job site, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, constructing, fabricating, welding, pulling wire. We had thousands, tens of thousands of acres of hectares of tomatoes coming up out of the ground up and down the state of California for hundreds of kilometers. We had vital equipment on ocean cargo freighters coming from Parma, Italy, Rossi Catelli Company, waiting to go through the Panama Canal. And we had to hire hundreds of people to operate the factory and drive the trucks. But finally, on July 16th of 1990, we turned on the factory and we produced 45 million kilograms of industrial tomato concentrate for the world market and basically changed the cost structure of the entire industry overnight and became a self-managed enterprise, unknown at that scale up to that time. And so from that point, we had to grow. The customers loved our product. We loved serving our customers. It was high quality, low cost product, structural cost advantage. We added another factory and then another factory. We expanded operations up and down the supply chain toward the customer in terms of remote warehouses across North America and in terms of going closer to the supply in farming and harvesting, transplanting, and trucking. In the course of that growth, we became a billion-dollar enterprise with thousands of employees. We don't call them employees, they're professional colleagues, each of whom has an equal voice, and became one of the largest self-managed enterprises in the whole world. And Harvard Business Review noticed, they wrote an article in 2011, cover story, called us the world's most creatively managed company. And so then people became interested in the story, wanting to know how can this possibly work. And so that's the story of Morningstar, and that's what informs everything I do today. So in 2002, I became an independent consultant, an evangelist for the future of work, for self-managed workplaces, for busting bureaucracy and hierarchy. And I've been evangelizing through books and keynotes and consulting and now a podcast ever since. I love what I do. I'll never retire. It is my mission in life to share those stories and
Let's
help people see the future.
let's stop here for a moment. Any idea about why this need of avoiding force, of different workplace resonated with Chris initially, and why does it resonate with you personally?
Well, I think it originated with Chris because he has a libertarian mindset, which is freedom, freedom and autonomy. So human respect, everyone having respect for each other's voice. And these principles are very precious. So if you think about the first principle of not using force, uh, these two principles together are the most important principles of human interaction. They are to human beings what gravity is to physics. So the first principle, not using force, imagine a world where every single person abandoned the use of force. We wouldn't need armies or navies or police or locks on our doors. And of course, that's not reality. We understand that. That's not realistic, but that's not the point. The point is the closer we can approach that ideal state in an organizational context, the more space we open up for human happiness and teamwork and prosperity and high performance and customer value creation. Take the second principle. Imagine a world where every single person always did 100% of the time exactly what they promised to do. That would be an amazing world in which to live. And we know that's not realistic. We understand that's not reality. But again, that's not the point. The point is the closer we can approach that ideal state in an organizational context, the more space we open up for human happiness and thriving, high performance, great teamwork, superb leadership, outstanding customer value creation. So that is the purpose of optimizing on core simple principles. And at Morningstar, it was really about managing enormous complexity because we're dealing with a supply chain that's affected by Mother Nature, managing enormous complexity in a world where it's governed by simple principles, the most important principles of human interaction.
And I suspect all of this resonates with you since you have been focusing on this space since then, right?
It resonates with me, and it reaches back to my early years. So the first day of first grade, when I started school for the very first day, I was 6 years old. And our first assignment on the first day was that our teacher gave us an outline of a buffalo to color, and she wanted us to color it brown. And I had a sense that a buffalo actually had a mane that was black and the rest of its body was brown. And so I colored it the way I thought it should be colored. And I received a severe reprimand for not following instructions. And so I immediately sensed that creativity was not valued in our industrial educational system. And subsequent progression through the educational system and through early work experiences reinforced that belief. And so coming to Morningstar was a source of great interest and enthusiasm because in a self-managed workplace, your creativity is highly valued.
And this connects to my next question. We are talking about a very complex environment, as you said, with thousands of people, with external factors, with competition, very international, in which human beings are treated as adults. What kind of freedom do personal professionals have in Morningstar? What is that they can decide about without any supervision? Why they are not employees?
It's great. It's a great question. So there's a philosophical aspect to that question and a practical aspect. So the philosophical aspect is that if you think about the word employee, the English language dictionary.com defines employee as, or at least it did, as someone who works for another person for pay. And I suspect if you put that definition in front of any Gen Z person in the world and ask them how exciting or enthused they would be about that definition, it wouldn't be very exciting because what's the benefit or thrill of working for another person for pay? Um, People should be seeking a source of authentic meaning through work if they're going to spend 50, 60 or more hours a week working, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? As Simon Sinek would say, start with why. So treating people like professionals as opposed to employees is very important. And at Morningstar, people are called colleagues because that connotes a professional status that applies to every single person. So everyone is considered a professional colleague. Everyone has a voice that must be respected. If you are a janitorial worker cleaning toilets, you are considered a full charge professional at Morningstar, and your voice counts just as much as a high tech, high end um, industrial electrician, for example. Everyone has an equal voice in matters that affect them. Everyone's considered a professional. There are no collars. We don't talk about collars at Morningstar. I hear a lot of discussion about blue collar versus white collar, et cetera, et cetera. Mornings, everyone's the same. So, in a practical sense, what is the scope of your autonomy? Well, everyone's expected to respect the two principles of not using force and keeping commitments. And beyond that, their decision-making authority, for example, is reflected in agreements that peers make with each other. And these peer agreements have a formal moniker called a colleague letter of understanding. It essentially just outlines the who, what, why, when, where, and how of work. So, what do I do? Well, it starts with a personal commercial mission. Why am I here? How does what I do support the mission, vision, principles, and values of the enterprise? Um, what are the expectations for my particular role? Why do I show up? From there, we go to the what. So, what are the services each person provides? Exactly. And that can incorporate decision-making authority called decision rights. What's the scope and quantum of my decision-making authority with respect to each one of the services I agree to provide? Who do I work with? Who's on my team? Those are the people with whom you're expected to sign a colleague letter of understanding. How do you work? What days do you work? What equipment do you need? What resources do you require? What budgetary authority do you expect to wield? All those questions are addressed by agreements between peers. And those peer agreements essentially constitute an entire replacement for layered bureaucracy and structural hierarchy and titles and authority over other people. That's very important. Not using force means no one has any authority to tell another person what to do. You can ask, you can make a request, but you can't direct another person. It also means no one has any authority to fire or terminate the employment of any other person unilaterally. You can ask someone to leave the enterprise, you can't terminate their employment. And so um, this is what we consider exhaustive due process. It means that everyone's voice must be respected and no one can railroad or pressure another person in an untoward manner. Everyone's respected in this environment.
Yeah, what you are stressing, I think, is pretty much unique or at least very rare. There is lots of talk about self-management. Kyocera has been doing it since 1959, but in most cases, the focus is more on a team that has no supervisor or manager, much less about the interactions between teams. Ayer talks a lot about EMC contracts. Again, it's an agreement in this case between units. But Morningstar is probably the first one that came up with this network of agreements. And these are really the nervous system of the organization. Is there a concept of team also in Morningstar, or at the end, the atomic, let's say, unit is really the individual, the one signing clues?
Thank you. I love that question. Yes, there is a concept of team at Morningstar. And I should say that Morningstar has business units. Those essentially represent the teams at Morningstar. So there's, for example, in the production area, there would be an electrician team or business unit. There would be a steam generation business unit. There would be an evaporation business unit. There would be a container filling business unit. So those constitute the teams. And those teams can have representatives execute service level agreements by and between the teams at team levels as well. So there are team agreements and there are individual colleague letters of understanding. And both of those types of agreements interact with each other and provide the infrastructure, the superstructure that replaces bureaucracy.
It sounds a bit too nice to be true. So my next follow-up question is really: is there a tie between the agreement, the performance of teams and colleagues, and the market? So you know, maybe I can decide to sign easier agreements, less agreements. What is pushing me to perform and to really generate value for colleagues and for the organization and for clients?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Value creation is one of the core principles of Morningstar, core values of Morningstar. So Morningstar teaches and inculcates an ethos of value creation at the individual level, the team level, and the enterprise level. Um, One's performance and business unit performance is measured clearly, and the measurements system is called stepping stones because in most companies the terminology varies, but there might be OKRs or KPIs or metrics or measures, whatever the term may be. That Morningstar measures are called stepping stones because they're considered stepping stones toward perfection. So perfection is um, the kind of the ultimate goal. Perfection for a cost metric, for example, is zero. Perfection for an efficiency metric is 100%. Perfection for a quality metric is zero defects. So what we find is when people aim for perfection, that unlocks blue sky innovation thinking that can be rather disruptive in terms of benefits to the customers and to the enterprise. So uh, Morningstar is aware of other companies and competitors, but it doesn't really benchmark other sectors, other industries, other competitors. It benchmarks perfection because of that unlock for blue sky innovation thinking. And so every single individual identifies stepping stones that relate or associate with the services they provide. So if I'm providing a service of generating steam, I may have three or four or five or six stepping stones that measure how well I'm delivering high quality steam in the proper quantities and qualities to my fellow business units, fellow colleagues. So people track these stepping stones. Many of them are automated. Some of them are manually input. But these stepping stones are displayed or available transparently, published across the enterprise so that people can look at them. And generally, they're expressed in terms of time series graphs showing trend lines over time. So if I see a trend line bending down, I can ask a fellow colleague who may be responsible for that particular stepping stone, what can I do to help you turn that around? It looks like we're going in the wrong direction there. Or if the curve is bending in the right direction, what can we do to bend that curve even steeper and create even better results than we have right now? So, uh, in a self-managed enterprise, it's these micro interactions by and between colleagues on a consistent basis. It could be minute to minute, hour to hour, week to week. But these conversations, these micro adjustments, are like little retro rockets firing off on a little spacecraft, and they're helping colleagues are helping each other course correct and perform better. And who's more likely to notice a challenge or a problem or a dependency or a bottleneck in a workplace? The colleagues who are, a boss who walks through once a day and scans the room, or colleagues who are working side by side with each other literally all day long and are in a position to share information on a minute-to-minute basis. So that's really the source of the power of self-management, having measures that are meaningful and being able to have conversations openly about those measures at any time.
What is the implication of this on compensation?
Um, Sorry, could you
Yeah, so
repeat that one?
see, yeah, the impact of all of these of the colleague letters of understanding on compensation. So
Yes.
I know even salaries are set in a pretty unique way. Are they
Yep.
connected to colleagues, to customers, to what?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. That question is interesting because in a self-managed environment, you don't have bosses deciding salaries. So every factory, and there are currently the three largest factories in the industry. Every factory has its own compensation committee. And then the agricultural operations have a compensation committee as well. These committees are representative, so they include colleagues from all aspects of that business, distribution, production, marketing, administration, accounting, all aspects of the business are represented in these compensation committees. And at the end of the year, uh, colleagues approach the committee as individuals and they share their information consists of their colleague letter of understanding as well as their stepping stones. So they've got all their stepping stones information for that year that they have available to share. And if the colleague is interested in a pay increase above and beyond the cost of living increase for that particular year, then they're expected to make a business case for the increase. And there are financially astute colleagues in the enterprise who can help colleagues develop a bona fide business case for this purpose. And then the individual colleague takes that business case to the committee and enters into negotiations with the committee. And they will come out of that negotiation with an agreed upon understanding. If they reach an impasse and can't agree, there are mechanisms in place to allow them to reach an agreement. And so that's how it works. If they don't ask for an increase above the cost of living, then they're probably going to get a cost of living increase. Their salaries when they enter the company initially are basically market-based salaries with a premium representing the fact that every single person is a manager engaged in the functions of traditional management. But increases are handled by the compensation committees in the way I described.
So there are no bosses telling you what to do. There are no bosses telling you how much you must earn, and there are no bosses managing conflicts, right? So even that is left to colleagues.
Yeah. Yeah, a slight variation on the idea of no bosses. There is a boss, it's just not a human boss. The boss is the mission of the enterprise.
Right,
That's the
because
North Star.
mission focus self-management. That's how I guess Morningstar calls it, right? Yeah, can you elaborate a
Right.
bit on that, please?
Uh, okay, so the idea of not having bosses when we human bosses when we started the company is the idea that every single person is already a manager in their own life, and management is planning, organizing, controlling, selecting, and coordinating. So planning is strategy, organizing is leadership, controlling is budgeting, selecting is hiring and firing, and coordinating is teamwork. And we all do that all the time in our own personal lives. So we're taking those skills and applying them to business. Now we enter the business, we have to have a raison d'etre. We have to have a reason for being there. The reason for being there is number one, the mission of the enterprise. And historically, that's been to produce tomato products that meet or exceed the expectations of customers in a cost-effective, environmentally responsible manner. Okay, that's why the business exists. But then what's your personal mission within that mission? Why are you here? How does what you do support the mission of the enterprise and uphold the services that you agree to provide? So that's the boss. It's a philosophical boss. It's the boss is an idea of pursuing the North Star, the Morning Star of beautiful, perfect results. That's why stepping stones measure perfection. And that's why no one has any authority to fire anyone else or tell anyone else what to do. So there's no human bosses, but there is a boss, and that's the mission.
And I guess sometimes there are conflicts because, again, otherwise it would be
Yes.
too nice to be true. I may get a bit too much weight or not enough, and colleagues may complain about it. So, how do you handle that if there is nobody on top solving conflicts?
So, great question. There is a mechanism called the gaining agreement process. And the gaining agreement process is very simple, and it requires what we call organizational adulting. So we expect people, if they have an issue or a problem with another person, and they want another person to change their behavior or to engage in some other process, then they have to make a direct request. So they approach the other individual and make a direct request. The other person is expected to respond to requests in a professional manner. So another person could respond to a request by saying, yes, I agree, or no, I disagree, or let's try out this third option that we hadn't thought of before. So, for example, if I see a person driving a forklift in an unsafe manner, I could ask them to stop driving and take a safety course for a week. I could make that request. The person may agree, they may disagree, or they may say, look, why don't I just take the day off and reread the safety manual and I'll come back tomorrow and do a better job. Okay, well, if I agree to that, that's fine. Now, if the person agrees, you're done. If you negotiate some third option, you're done. If you still can't agree, then there's a mediation step. So you escalate to the next step, which is mediation. You bring in a third party, another colleague, any other colleague that's trusted, and each party shares their story. And at that point, we have the same three possible outcomes. We either agree or disagree, or we negotiate some third option. So if we agree, we're done. If we negotiate something, we're done. If we still disagree, and I still believe in my initial request, then we escalate to the next step, which is to bring in a panel of mediators. And their job is the same as the first mediator, just to listen to both sides and offer their best advice. And at the end of that discussion, there's still the same three possible outcomes, right? So we agree, we're done, negotiate, we're done. If we still disagree and I still believe in my request, then we have agreed by virtue of subscribing to these principles in the first place, to submit our disagreement to final binding arbitration. And it has to end somewhere. And so a decision maker will make a decision, and that will be the end of it. And everyone must accept that outcome. So this process is not new, Emmanuel. This process has been around for thousands of years. Essentially, the essence of it has, and structurally. And so this is ancient human wisdom coming to life inside a modern industrial organization. Now, people choose, because people have free will, if they choose not to engage in the gaining agreement process and not to make a request in the first place, then that's their choice. And that's the cost of living in a self-managed ecosystem. People sometimes make suboptimal choices and don't engage when they should, and that can be a problem. But you still avoid all the costs of bureaucracy, and you still reap all the benefits of organizational self-management.
Yeah, what I perceive is lots of responsibility that people have to take on. It's not an easy environment. It's a brilliant, philosophically speaking, environment, but takes lots of ownership on behalf of individuals to show up, to confront others, to speak up, to go through the process, to accept the conclusions. So really not that easy. So I can imagine there could be many times in which individuals may have different ideas. Is there any decision-making approach, Morningstar? So on top of colleague letters of understanding, but even for smaller things, if the two of us work together or the five of us work together, and at the end we don't agree, but there is no major conflict, is there any mechanism, for example, consent or consensus, that could help us to find the best solution for everybody? Or is this really left to only the agreement, so in a formal sense?
Yeah, the beauty of organizational self-management is practiced at Morningstar is that people are free to negotiate the ownership, the scope and quantum of decision rights ownership in whatever way makes sense for them. Now, if people choose to navigate decision making informally within their business units and with their team members, and just verbal on a day-to-day basis, that's fine if it works for them. But if people want to negotiate actual ownership of decision rights, they're completely free to do so. And we actually developed a game. I've developed a game that I shared with colleagues at Morningstar. Excuse me one second. Take a little water.
Please go ahead.
And it's called Decision Rights Poker. And so we have a deck of cards, a set of cards, one through Jack, Queen, King, Ace, and these cards represent different types of decision making. So you mentioned consensus, you mentioned consent. Those are two cards in the deck. There's liquid democracy, where you give your decision rights to somebody else. There's I make the decision 100% of the time, and no one else does. Two people co-author decisions. We have majority vote decisions. What makes sense for a particular decision? And people are free to think about these things. And it's fascinating because I've run workshops where I have small teams brainstorm their most important decisions on a flip chart. And then each person gets a set of cards, and then we have them go through the list of decisions one by one. And okay, for decision number one, what card do you play? And it's often very interesting. You may have seven people with a high level of commercial responsibility, and I've seen seven people play a completely different card. No one played the same card for a particular decision. So that is very interesting and stimulates a lot of discussion. It's about how we make decisions. So how we make decisions, and then who are the people that make those decisions. That is completely free to negotiate, and it's very interesting discussions as well.
Yeah, definitely an odd and complex topics in self-management. Um, a question I still have is, what is the role of business units? So at the end, if every individual can sign a contract, can negotiate the scope, the commitments, there are clear values they adhere to. What is a business unit about? What is left to do at that level?
Good question. I think the purpose of having business units is to stimulate economic thinking on the part of each and every colleague. So if I'm in a business unit in a factory, I have five fellow colleagues. We've got our own P&L. We've got our own little balance sheet. Um, we have strategic decision-making rights, so we're deciding how to run this equipment, how to repair it, how to operate it, and maintain it, how to staff the operations, etc. We're making, in some cases, multi-million dollar decisions inside a particular business unit in one factory. That requires some serious economic thinking. So people have to understand return on investment, internal rate of return, perhaps, um, capital decision making, how to prioritize capital project proposals, how to understand a balance sheet, how to understand a P&L, um, financial accounting, cost accounting, how to understand contribution margin. So, people generally, if they haven't had accounting or studied it, don't necessarily have those understandings and skills. But at Morningstar, we actually have had an MBA, a mini MBA program, where we've had janitors and clerks and forklift drivers and mechanics and electricians learn all those financial concepts I just discussed, and they are fully equipped to make good decisions for their respective business units. And if they wanted to leave the company and start their own small business, they're equipped to do that as well. And so helping people learn is a huge benefit, and it's a big reason why people stay at the company.
Yeah, that was the question I wanted to ask. What is the role of financial controller in this kind of system? Because in my experience, many companies with plenty of freedom at the divisional level struggle to understand the numbers because people are not used to that. They never had to do it. And now, for the first time, they are responsible for profit and losses and understanding investments and all of that that you have described. So, what is the role of financial controller, but let's say financial data into this kind of model?
Well, the financial data has to be clean, and financial controller has to be able to roll up individual business unit performance into a factory performance into an entire enterprise performance, and so that takes some serious work. And then all that information rolls up into various financial models that determine how much money needs to be borrowed, for example, from a bank, whether it's for capital projects or for operation lines of credit. So, um, absolutely need accountants who are responsible for getting clean data into financial systems and shared with third parties as needed.
It may appear a bit less evident, but again, my understanding is that behind the interconnections between the teams, there is lots of infrastructure. It could be financial, it could be technological, right? Because all the contracts are stored into on information systems. Um, how is the company Morningstar addressing that? Is there a concept of shared service platforms, central functions supporting colleagues with some standard services, or are these responsibilities infused into business units or into teams? So if I need IT support, if I need financial support, whatever I need, that is not really my job to know where can I go in Morningstar.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on the current state of IT systems at Morningstar, but there are IT professionals there. They actually, I believe, they constitute a business unit of their own, and they are out there providing services to colleagues as needed for IT support and data and stepping stones and all the rest of it. So people know who to call when they need help or upgrades or new systems or performance enhancements or whatever it might be.
And they sign colleague letters of understanding with as others do, right? So it's the same basic mechanism also for this kind of services.
Yeah, the colleague letters of understanding are online, so they're available online and published, and people can look at their own and look at other people's colleague letters of understanding. So they're transparently distributed throughout the enterprise online on a system. So all that information is available.
What is the most difficult part in adopting this kind of model? So is this good for everyone? Is everyone thriving in this kind of system, or some people loved it and some people reject it?
Yeah, it's if you think about the spectrum of human mindsets and behaviors and culture, um, I would say not everyone loves organizational self-management as practiced by Morningstar. Um, on the other hand, if we look at retention numbers, it seems that most people do. So there is a seasonal component at Morningstar, as well as a year-round component, people who work year-round and are salaried and delivering professional services as we think of them. And then there are seasonal people who drive trucks and sort tomatoes and perform harvest type labor. All of them are considered professionals with an equal voice. But the seasonal folks, they only work 8.5, they only work 3.5 months out of the year. So, and sometimes less, sometimes only three or so months out of the year. And many of them live in Mexico. So they leave California and they go back to Mexico for most of the year. And then they come back for the harvest season. So there have been years where there was a 100% return rate of seasonal colleagues from one year to the next after they'd been laid off for 8.5 months. 100% return rate of colleagues coming back because why? Because they love the culture and they love the social aspects of working with their friends that they've known for years, who are also returning. And so the retention rate of year-round colleagues is quite high. People tend to stay because they can't conceive of leaving and going to a traditional command and control organization. So people do tend to stay when they become acculturated and accept the principles and learn how to work within them. Um, People that don't stay are generally people who have been perhaps a boss in another company and have experienced power and perks and salaries and a corner office and all the rest and are used to telling people what to do. I would say those people sometimes have been hired for their subject matter expertise, but they don't last because they just don't fit in with the culture. And so people can figure out within about 12 months whether or not this culture is going to work for them, and then they exercise their free will to either stay or to leave.
So I think it's clear that approaching work in this way is good for people. It works for people. Does it also work for returns, numbers, results? Is there any exceptional uh, result that you have seen thanks to this model, something that has been achieved and that would have been possible otherwise? Any anecdote, any story that you can remember that made you think, wow, we did it only because of this?
Yeah, I can, and I'll share that. I wouldn't necessarily say it would have been impossible without the structure, but the structure certainly facilitated the result I'm about to describe. So there is a steam generation unit, a boiler unit at one of the factories. And the colleagues there were studying the possibility of uh, installing a cogeneration unit, which would significantly lower electrical costs by using excess steam to generate electricity. And it would also provide some risk mitigation because it would allow the factory to continue operating even if there were a power outage from the local electric utility. And so these colleagues studied this problem, this opportunity, and they created a capital project proposal, and they worked through it with the finance people and the owner and everyone else who would have to be involved with installing this large cogeneration unit. And they reached a point where the economics made perfect sense and everything looked very positive, and it went forward. They installed the unit. And in their first year of operation, there was a giant power outage triggered by the local electric utility. And this cogeneration unit allowed the factory to continue operating even when every other factory in the area had to shut down because there was no power. So their idea was vindicated almost immediately and continues to supply great cost savings in the electricity and utilities bills. So that was a recent great example of self-management and proactive self-managed leaders coordinating together, um, running the numbers, doing the economic thinking, the rigorous economic analysis, and ending up with a great result that really proved itself.
Yeah, we talked a lot about leadership, leaders in Morningstar. What does leadership mean? You are no longer a boss. You cannot tell people what to do. What is Chris Ruffer responsible for? What are other colleagues responsible for under a leadership lens? What does leadership mean here?
Great question, and I wish we had more time because my best friend the last few years until he passed just a little over a year ago was Dr. Peter Kestenbaum, and he developed a leadership diamond model that we teach at Morningstar, and it makes perfect sense. And it's about balancing courage. Courage is the starting point of all leadership because courage is the leadership attribute that makes all other leadership attributes possible. And you have to have courage to make direct requests and confront colleagues and engage in resolving conflict and all the rest. But it's also about envisioning a desired future state into which you can invite people. Because at Morningstar, you can't command people, you can only invite them. And if your vision is clear enough, as in the case of the gentleman in the STEAM unit who envisioned a cogeneration unit, they were able to paint a picture of a desired future state and invite people to join them. Balanced with courage is ethics, which is about caring, kindness, compassion, nurturing, support, encouragement, empathy, all those things. It's about other people. So courage is about your own inner strength. Ethics is about other people. You got to care about other people. If you don't care about other people, they're not going to listen to you. So that's crucial. And ethics is also about right and wrong, of course. We're not going to lie, cheat, and steal, and we're not going to tolerate people who lie, cheat, and steal. The left side of the diamond is reality. You have to have a really good understanding of your current state reality. What are my economic constraints? What are my opportunities? What are the risks? What's my emotional state? What are the emotional states of my colleagues? Um, what's our culture? What is the reality of our current situation? Because that essentially dictates the success of achieving your ultimate vision. So you have to be clear about reality. That's the here and now, the current state. Vision is the future state. So we're balancing inner with others. We're balancing current state with future state. And the ultimate destination is greatness. And we should all be pursuing greatness because greatness is inherently good. Why would we want anything other than greatness? The opposite of greatness is mediocrity. And no one wants mediocrity for themselves or the people they care about. So this is all fueled by free will and anxiety and channeling our energy in the right direction. And those opportunities are open to every single person at Morningstar. And Chris Rufer, the founder, is a great exemplar of all of those characteristics.
I love aspiring to greatness. I think it's a good target, probably the only one we should pursue. So let me close with the final question. AI now, it's probably the hottest topic also in organization design. If we project ourselves 50 years in the future, who knows? It's a lot of time. What do you expect for models such as Morningstar's One in the future under AI? Will they become more important? Will they be the foundation for AI use? Any thought about that? About what the future of organizing may be based on your experience?
A great question. I wish I could answer it because AI has already permeated much of what every company is doing and will do. The agentic AI is coming on so strong right now. People are launching agents all over the place. And hopefully, in terms of augmentation and not just to reduce headcount. Um, if people can figure out how to unleash agents to leverage their time and talents and creativity and become much more productive. That could make for a very exciting world. And then we have the coordination challenge. So um, right now, it's challenging for humans to coordinate at scale in large organizations. And with so many dependencies and we get time zones and language barriers and all the rest of it, how does a large organization coordinate humans at scale? Well, the technology for the last few thousand years has been having meetings. So we'll have meeting after meeting after meeting, and meetings are very inefficient and very expensive. And now we've got AI agents running around. How do we coordinate AI agents with humans and with other AI agents? So it's human to human, agent to agent. How do we coordinate all that at scale? I think that's going to be one of the defining challenges of our time. And I think we're going to have to turn to nature and look at how nature coordinates. How does the Argentine ant achieve global dominance through simple principles of coordination? How do bees operate in a beehive? How do humans and AI agents signal each other so that we can coordinate effectively and actually achieve outcomes that customers care about? I think that's going to be one of the challenges of our time.
I love it. I love to conclude with biomimicry. I think getting inspiration from nature and ecosystems, even if you haven't used the word, I think that's what you are pointing to is a great direction for us all. Doug, thank you so much for this conversation, for your insights, and for sharing what you have learned and what you are still learning in your projects. And let's definitely keep in touch to see
Yeah.
future evolutions and future learnings. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Emmanuel. Great questions.
Thank you.